All right, let's take a moment to consider emergencies. So pause this video, get your telephone out and scan the QR code there and watch that video. Short video, just as an introduction to this segment. So pause now and we'll move on. Okay, so you saw that video, hopefully, and there's all kinds of emergencies that might occur. Some of them may involve the drone, some of them might involve your environment surrounding you as the drone operator. It may be something totally incidental to what you're doing, but it may affect you. One of the issues that manned aircraft pilots have faced over the years is that when an emergency occurs, whatever the nature of it is, it's likely to be unexpected. So you have this startle response, which you end up pausing for a little bit, which is not necessarily bad. But still, there's a startled response. There might be some fear involved because of the possible outcomes, which might negatively impact your physical body. But there's some confusion, maybe trying to determine what really is going on. Well, we've learned to manage our priorities. First off, we need to continue to fly the airplane. Even though something else is going on that may be an emergency, we need to really continue to fly the airplane. Happily, many of our drones do have, when you let go of the controls, they just hover. That's great. But still, we still need to be aware of what the airplane's doing, what the aircraft is doing, where it is, which way it's going. Then the second is to navigate. An example might be, as unlikely as it may seem, your drone bursts into flames. And assuming it's still flying, you want to maneuver or navigate the drone, to a place where if it were to fall out of the sky, it wouldn't start a major forest fire, or it wouldn't land on the farmer's wheat field and burn all of his crops down, or it might land on a rooftop and burn a building down and cause more damage. So navigate. And then, of course, communicate. So those are the priority. Fly the aircraft, aim the aircraft in a safe area. If you just happen to have permission to fly over a congested area of people, you need to get away from them. Third is let people know what you're doing. Right? So piloting, directing the aircraft is the pilot's top priority. Okay. Again, pause this video in a second, and QR code to the left side there. In that video, it just describes, a short video describes a pilot been distracted and loses control. Just consider how you might have prevented this in this situation. So distraction is definitely a pilot-initiated emergency. In other words, you screwed up, basically. But anyway, watch this video briefly, and then we'll get back and continue. Okay, so we have different kinds of emergencies. One is ground emergencies. There's a whole variety of them. Use your imagination for these, because there are plenty of other options. I've just got a few here as samples to give you some thought about. Battery fires, obviously. Failure of the UAS to turn off, it lands and propeller lights continuing. Interference by the public, or maybe somebody got sick. You got sick, right? That happens. Battery fires, hopefully you've already seen some videos on this issue. Yeah, LiPo batteries store a lot of energy. That's why we like them. And they're light. They don't have much protection, so you can drop them. If you drop them, or if a major crash of your drone could damage the containment, and it could start leaking or swelling. So battery fires are rare, but when they do occur, big deal. Okay, so handle them with care. In your pre-flight inspection, you're looking at them, make sure they're not swelling, they're not leaking, or if they're hot and they've just been sitting on the shelf, that's a warning sign. Let's do something about that. Let's check that out. So some of the suggestions that the manufacturers typically put on their packages is, don't recharge one battery. So in other words, you fly for 20 minutes, the battery gets low, throw it on the charger real quick, and then take it as soon as it's filled up, charged up, put it back in your drone, fly again, right? Because it's keeping the drone hot. It doesn't have time to cool down. So they're suggesting have multiple batteries. And again, allow batteries to cool down after it's been used and before you recharge it and before you reuse it as well. Battery, thermal battery, LiPo batteries have a propensity to have thermal runaway. That's the problem. The reactive nature makes them subject to those thermal runaways. It can be a chain reaction. So one of the cells, typically there's 2, 3, maybe 4 cells in one pack that you shove into your drone to power it. If only one cell might be bad, right? That doesn't matter. It could, if it starts to discharge or have runaway, thermal runaway, it will set off the other ones as well. It may set off the other ones. Hey, thermal runaway, very dangerous. Smoke, fire, explosion, or at least explosive flames. Just simply overheating or damage or short circuit can cause a LiPo fire or initiate it. Okay, if it starts smoking or does start a fire, isolate it if possible. Don't grab the battery but if you got a long stick, you can poke it off the table onto the floor or away from the other batteries. Yeah, you might want to do that. If so, isolate it if possible. Cool it down. How do you do that? Class D fire extinguisher. They don't suggest water, but I mean, if a total, you got no other choice, get water on it, but that's not recommended just because it's electrical. Part of it's electrical. That's part of the issue. And so Class D fire extinguisher, we have them here at the drone classroom. Sand, dirt, or a fire blanket to smother the fire as well, if that's possible. We do have a sandbag here, so even if it was worse, that'd be a great solution, is just throw this sandbag on top of it. It'll smother it, cool it, keep it from burning. Anyway, move away from the smoking or swollen batteries. We've got toxic fumes, et cetera, et cetera. So again, you might not want to have your primary charging station inside your closet at your house. Probably not a good idea. Another kind of ground emergency would be the shutdown. Maybe a software glitch or a ground control issue might interfere with its shutdown. As you're aware, when the drone gets close to the ground, it has those sensors on the bottom that detect how far above the ground it is. So as it approaches the ground, it slows down and does a nice gentle landing. And as soon as it gets on the ground, the propeller blades stop moving. Well, if the sensors are defective, or if the surface that it's landing on isn't appropriate, maybe too shiny or not enough texture to it, visual texture to it, it might continue to turn the blades on. Well, that's an emergency because it's still spinning those blades. It might hurt somebody. Possible solutions are to use the emergency shutdown command. Every drone manufacturer has some slightly different way of doing that, so they're not standard. This is part of the thing you learn about each drone, each different manufacturer, and even each drone from a manufacturer may have a different system. And we'll have discussed that in one of these labs. But you'll use the emergency shutdown that will just stop the propeller blades instantly. Or you may just do the regular startup shutdown sequence from the ground control station. You might try to reach underneath the spinning propeller blades and remove the battery, or just push the button, how you can shut the battery off. That's possible. Or you might just have to let the battery run dead. That's a possibility too. So these are just typical or possible ground emergencies. Again, expect the unexpected. non-participant interference. Okay, sometimes stuff like this happens. Then there may be some different reasons, right? There might be some curious bystander just walks up and wants to talk to you, right? And you're just doing the takeoff or landing, and they're walking right up here, and the propeller blades are spinning. Well, you need to consider your reaction to that. That's sort of an emergency. Or maybe just somebody not even aware that you're flying around there and you're trying to take pictures of a particular flower bed or something like that, and somebody, maybe just a little kid walks up and runs up in front of, that's an emergency. People may come with privacy concerns too, and they're typically going to be slightly irate at you already, or they might think that you're making too much noise and they want some peaceful time having their picnic at the park, right? So, we need to be considerate of these people. We've talked about ethics already in the past, but we want to be considerate of them, but that can become an emergency if they're totally distracting you or consuming your time. You can nicely tell them, let me land the airplane and I'll be glad to talk to you. And they may insist they want to talk right now. And so we need to learn how to deal with that. Maybe an animal like this picture here, right? Some dogs just love to attack moving birds and they don't know the difference. So that's a possibility. Maybe a law enforcement officer wants to talk to you, right? He may have some concerns, or she may have some concerns about your operation. Somehow you need to learn how to respectfully help them to understand that you're actually in the process of flying and you need to be watching the drone. We can't give you, I'm sorry, sir or ma'am, I can't, just give me a second to land the drone. I'll be glad to talk to you and show you my identification, all that stuff. But one thing I can't really do now is just ignore the drone and pull my wallet out and show you my certificates and all that. I know I have to do that, and I will do that. Let me just land this drone, but you got to do it respectfully, because you know how that's just that would be the wise thing to do. Let's put it that way. So what are your reactions to interference with your operation? Just remember that any interference or disruption may cause a distraction, or some kind of safety concern. So you need to have a plan to land as soon as possible in a safe place. In other words, you might have to have an alternate landing site or an alternate landing procedure. One possibility is to hover at 5 feet above the ground and reach underneath the drone and grab it, and then with your other hand with a controller shut the propeller blades off. Or better yet, have a visual observer that's brave enough to grab the drone while you control it. If you have little kids around or a crowd of people, that it might. Okay, so expect the unexpected. Like I said, I've listed some possibilities, but there are always other possibilities that I haven't considered. For example, here's a burning drone. I think it's Photoshop probably, but some in-flight emergencies also can become dangerous, like the birds or something like that. So we have flyaways. Okay, now this is going to take a little bit of explanation, because what are emergencies and what aren't emergencies, right? If you lose control, but the connection between the control station you're holding in your hot little hands and that drone, is that an emergency? No, it's not an emergency, because it's programmed to automatically return to home, or you may have it programmed just to hover. There's a number of different selections you need to make, but typically we do it so it returns home. So if you lose connection, for a little bit, it'll wait and see if it reconnects. If it doesn't reconnect, it'll climb up to whatever altitude you told it to climb to, then fly back to the GPS location where it took off, and then come straight down and land on that spot. Everything hunky-dory. Everything's fine. Not an emergency. But a flyaway is one of those situations where it loses connection with your ground control unit, but it does not do what it was predicted to do, what it was programmed to do, rather. It doesn't return home. It just flies away. Pretty rare, but it has happened at least once at the school here, where the drone just flies away. So why is that an emergency? Because we don't know where it's going. It may fly into controlled airspace. It may fly over the interstate and then land in front of a 75-mile-an-hour semi truck and hit his windshield, and he swerves off the runway and crashes, and he's carrying a load of nuclear waste, and now we've got we got major problems, right? So I mean, that's just possible. What can we do about flyaways? It's just an emergency, so we need to report that. In some format. We don't know whether it's going to make an accident or not. If it doesn't make an accident, it might just land in a tree somewhere. Nobody will ever find it. It might land on top of a large building downtown Atlanta, but nobody will ever know until somebody goes up there to do a roof repair, and they'll look at it and go, "Oh, what in the heck is this?" Well, we haven't really done any accident investigation reports, but there was that fellow in Long Island that flew out over the bay and lost sight of the drone. We got out of line of sight, and it hit it was the Air Force, might have been an Army helicopter, and all they found was just a little part of it. Well, they tracked the part down and they found the guy. So in cases of flyaways where you probably need to, of course, you don't make a report until the FAA asks you, but you might want to do a NASA report, and we'll talk about that in another session. But a NASA report would give you immunity as long as you weren't doing it on purpose. Obviously, a flyaway is not on purpose, so it gives you some immunity if they don't accept your report and they want to accuse you of something. Long explanation for one slide, but those flyaways anyway are an emergency. Okay, other emergencies might be, in-flight emergencies might be engine or structural failure. One of those engines quits in a multicopter and it's going to come straight down. If you have a fixed wing drone, it can glide for a while and you have some control over where it's going to hit the ground, which is great. But still, it's an emergency. Imminent collision with other aircraft, that's an emergency. You need to get out of the way. We have to give way to all manned aircraft, but it may be an imminent collision with another drone. Battery fires, obviously, this is a little picture here. I think it's photoshopped, but it's a possible battery fire, so it's still flying. So your emergency solution here is to get somewhere where when it does come down, it doesn't set the field into fire. Or bird strike or bird attack, or any animal attack, really. So some tips, always follow manufacturers' tips, guidelines, and instructions for emergencies. However, at this point, there aren't any typically. So we are the ones that need to come up with our own emergency checklist, or at least think through what you're going to do for common emergencies. And there's always that one that's unexpected, but the more we think through what we might do in case of this or that, the better we'll be able to handle it. So maybe even do some research, find out what other people have come up with. Remote pilots should use their best judgment. Remember 107, paragraph 21, an in-flight emergency require immediate action. The remote pilot or command may deviate from any rule of this part to the extent necessary to meet that emergency. Each remote pilot and command, each remote pilot and command who deviates from a rule under this paragraph must, upon request of the administrator, send a written report of that deviation to the administrator. But again, that's great. Wait for them to ask you, but before they ask, send that NASA report in and get, just explaining what happened and what you might have done to prevent it, or maybe there was nothing you could do to prevent it. And we'll talk about that in a lab as well. Ask me about it. Okay, another emergency is possible emergency. Might be a GPS failure or radio signal failure due to interference. We're aware that that's one of the checklist items before we depart and do a mission or go out to fly, is that make sure that the drone is receiving sufficient GPS signals to determine where it is and how high it is, right? And speeds and all that stuff. GPS, of course, gives altitude, latitude, and longitude information if we get all of the as many possible GPS satellites receiving their signals, right? So we definitely want to remember that that's part of the checklist. And I believe there's a video on this segment that describes what GPS is, so I won't elaborate too much, but GPS is really helpful. Now, it's not an emergency if you lose GPS signal, though. That's what I did want to mention. If you lose GPS signal, the drone will just be less stable. It will be, you'll have to pay more attention to it. If there's wind, the wind will drift, it will not hold position. And it won't return to home either. It won't know where home is, so you'll have to, that's why you need to keep the drone in sight at all times, visual sight, so that you can look at it and get it to fly back to you, because it will not automatically come back to you. Okay, so here's a procedure for lost link, okay? Again, lost link is not a problem. Fly away is a problem. So pause my video, scan the QR code, watch this guy's video, and then come back to me, because we're not done. Okay, hopefully you enjoyed that video. A little bit of a long video, but that's okay. All right, temporary transmission interruptions can cause lost links, right? When the connection between the ground control station and the drone is lost, the return to home or other protocol procedure will provide a safe solution to the problem, right? It's either going to hover, if you're the one that makes that decision, it's going to hover, do you want it to return home, or do you want it to land right where it is? Either one is fine, just as long as you know what you're asking for and what it's going to do. If it doesn't do what it's predicted to do, then that's the problem. Lost link, again, is not an emergency as long as the drone automatically establishes or reestablishes its GPS signals and does what it's asked to do. If it doesn't, if it just takes off and disappears somewhere, that's an emergency. In some cases, lost link and loss of GPS signal may cause a flyaway. This particular example, you see this building here, I believe it was Chicago. An incident happened a year ago, or actually it's been more than a year. He was inspecting I think it was a 26th floor or something like that. He was doing a window inspection, some kind of inspection. So he flew up to the top of this thing. It's a bunch of these buildings with shiny surfaces. And he could still see it, straight up, right? But the GPS signal, he started losing the GPS signals because apparently, this is what the report said. I don't know, but the report said that was losing solid GPS signals. So he would have been able to determine that if he'd look at his control station occasionally, but started losing good GPS, so it started drifting, and it drifted in the side of the building and fell 26 stories and landed right next to some pedestrian. And of course, the news media just happened, or somebody was a camera was there, which is the typical, right? Caught this, and it went to the news media, and they made a big story about how drones falling from the sky are dangerous, and drone pilots are dangerous, and drones are dangerous, and we need more laws for it, and all this stuff. So that was bad. It could have hit somebody, and then it would have been bad. However, the drone was only, I think it was a $15,000 drone. It was destroyed, but nothing else was destroyed. So he was just plumb out of luck. Didn't have to do a report or anything like that, right? Less than $500 damage. There was nothing damaged, really. Anyway, that was an emergency. But just be aware that in some situations you might lose GPS signals and it's just not going to be stable. That's what he missed, was he missed the fact that the GPS signals were no longer stable and the drone started drifting. If he'd known that he was losing GPS signals or they were getting unstable, he could have manually controlled it so it didn't hit the building. That's the point. There's other situations. Cell towers sometimes emit enough radio waves that it might interfere with the connection between the drone and your ground control station. Probably not going to interfere with GPS signals because totally different frequencies, but could cause a problem. So you got to return to home setting for 100 feet, big deal, and you're flying on the other side of this cell tower. The cell tower, by the way, is 140 feet high. You've got the return to home set for 100 feet. You lose connection. After a little bit, it decides, okay, I'll climb to 100 feet. Great, and I'll return to home. Whammo! It hits the tower on the way home because it's just going to go in a straight line. It doesn't know that you're the one that has to make that decision. If you're going to fly on the backside of that tower, you might want to make sure return to home makes the drone climb to higher than that obstacle. Just something to think about. Okay, so drone operators ought to think through a loss link plan for each flight, consider some factors, alternate landing sites, procedure for switching control radio frequencies. Most of the drones have an automated feature which switches automatically the frequency that communicates between your ground control station and the drone, right? There's two different frequencies, and it'll automatically switch the best one. If one starts getting interference, it has a spectrum analyzer built into the control station, so it automatically can tell. Wonderful, lasts a long time. Check the area for possible communication interference, like cell towers or shiny buildings. Monitor GPS signal strength prior to and occasionally during the operation. That would have helped that fella. Ensure the batteries from your ground control station are adequately charged. What happens if you're running out of battery power for your ground control station? Well, it's not going to continue to connect. Happily, though, the drone will do its automated return to home program if that happens. But still, you want to make sure, we're all hepped up on making sure the drone battery is up to date and power had enough charge, but the ground control station is important as well. So loss of GPS signals, even in a case where the aircraft loses GPS signals, the pilot and command should be able to operate the UAV manual, of course. Just going to be drifting a little bit. But, we should practice occasionally flying without a GPS, by the way. But before we take off, that's part of the pre-flight thing again, is to make sure there's enough GPS satellites to connect. This particular picture here shows, typically it's on the top of a row right up in here. You see right in here, then there's a blow up of it here. He's getting 13 signals. Good to go. Not a problem. So we want to make sure that we have enough. And sometimes, as you might have already noticed, we have to hover, 5, 6, 10 feet above the ground before it gets all those signals, but you just don't want to fly away until you get all of sufficient signals. And then, and if it's a DJI, it says home point set, or you might have to manually set the home point so it knows where to return to home. So that's part of the pre-flight, and the thing you need to monitor also as you're flying along. Okay, flight termination, different ways to terminate an aircraft, but flight termination occurs when a remote pilot intentionally ends the flight. Now, this is not a new thing, but some UAVs will have a parachute system for last resort situation to prevent damaging people or property in the case of an uncontrollable UAV. You just lost control totally, you pop the chute and it comes on down. I foresee this whole issue with flight over people. Eventually, this will be something you can put on a drone so that you may fly over groups of people legally. Right now, we're not allowed to fly over groups of people, assembly of persons, but that's a possibility. But without that kind of technology, the operator needs to be aware of the area that they're flying and make sure that they've considered some options for minimizing the risk to persons or property in case you need to do an unscheduled descent. Earlier we talked about an emergency stop procedure. Different drones are going to have different procedures. Okay, so every model drone you fly, you definitely want to do your own research. But under advanced settings for the Phantom Pros, it's the left thumb pressed that way while you press the return to home button here, and the propellers will stop. Of course, if you're in the air, the drone will drop to the ground and maybe break. So you don't really want to do this unless it's really an emergency. If you're on the ground, though, and the propeller blades for some reason aren't shutting off, you could do this. Or if you just happen to be flying indoors and you get the drone caught in the netting and the drone's sitting sideways and the motors are revving up and it's just chopping things up and not really doing anything, getting all tangled up, worse tangled up in the netting, then you would do this as well. So it's just something you ought to be aware of. The drone lands somewhere where there's little kids running around, the kid's running up there, wants to grab it. Or maybe you don't want your dog to get his lips cut. You can shut the drone off instantly. Initiating that mode immediately stops propeller blades and causes the uncontrolled descent into the ground and may hit something that's on the way down. So just be aware of that. All right, we have some tips to avoid a flyaway and also tips to recover your aircraft in case it does fly away. So all's not lost just because it flies away. We may be able to find it. So pause this video, my video, and watch this video. QR code on the left side there.